and welcome to the Psych and Business Podcast, where we highlight the integration of psychology and psychological principles into the world of business and organizations. I'm your host, Dr. Ernest Wayde. I'm excited to introduce you to my guest today, a fellow coach and consultant that I met at a conference and immediately enjoyed speaking with. Her name is Dr. Connie Schroyer. Dr. Schroyer is a seasoned executive coach, facilitator, and transformation consultant who works with senior executives to create teams, individuals, and environments that have a positive impact on people and drive real change. Connie has 30 years of experience helping organizations implement their strategy, working with teams, culture, and leadership with a strong focus on emotional intelligence. Connie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ernest. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about myself and my work. I appreciate it.
Connie, I'm really looking forward to having you talk about all of those things. But before we get started, I always want to start by asking, how did you get into this work? And tell us about your journey as to how you ended up at Korn Ferry and starting your own business.
Yep. Happy to. So, I've always loved psychology and always knew that this was what I wanted to do. Even from, and I don't even know if they still offer this, but even in high school, I took a psychology class from one of my teachers, and I said, "This is for me." And in undergrad, I went to University of Maryland, and I was very interested in social psychology, the group norms. I volunteered for all these experiments that the psychology department was doing. And I just love the social aspect of it. And of course, that evolved into, where can I apply this into organizations? So IO psychology. And from there, I did most of my career, I spent as a consultant with Hay Group, which was then acquired by Korn Ferry about 7 years ago. So it became part of Korn Ferry. And I would say that, what I loved about it was I could apply the psychology that I had learned, and really understanding what is it that motivates people, why do people do what they do, and how does that impact success in business and in organizations. And I know you had Dr. Greg Pennington on a prior podcast who talked about McClelland's motives, the need for power, affiliation, and achievement. So I won't go into detail there, but I also was trained and worked very deeply in that area. I also this was probably the mid to late 1990s, right? When Dan Goleman was actually working with Richard Boyatzis to come up with the 360 around emotional intelligence, and had written a book on working with emotional intelligence. And I actually had the opportunity to travel a little bit as Dan Goleman was going out and speaking. And at that time, CEOs and business leaders were saying, oh my gosh, this is something that we need to pay attention to. Up until then, there was a pretty high focus on believing that leadership was just about how smart you were and what experience you had and those sorts of things, not necessarily the emotional intelligence component. So a lot of my career was spent working on developing through coaching and leadership development, emotional intelligence, and understanding how who you are as a person and what motivates you actually plays into that. And then, of course, I extended that into doing work with teams. And, there's a whole body of work around emotional intelligence of a team, that when you put a group of people who have emotional intelligence together, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll have emotionally intelligent team, that there's a difference between that. So I did that for many years. I was also a general manager for a number of years with Hay Group. So I have leadership experience myself. And that was really my aspiration when I started my career, was to be a general manager. But I realized when I got there that it really wasn't, I didn't really like it. I didn't like the business part of it or the operational part of it. I loved the people leadership. So I, had a number of roles after that was more around leading people and working with clients. It was just a better fit for me. So I say that I semi-retired from Korn Ferry about 2 years ago and started my own business, Thea Leadership. And although it doesn't really have it semi-retired, but I would say that I'm now more focused on what I love to do. And I very intentionally chose the name when I was starting my own business, because Thea is the Greek goddess of, the light in the clear blue sky, or vision. And what I really wanted to focus, my remaining years of working and doing, was helping people through my coaching, helping teams and helping organizations to really think about what is the vision that we're striving towards, where are we trying to go, And oftentimes people just don't spend enough time thinking and focusing on all of that. So that's where I am today. I also have a partnership with a number of individuals doing some innovative things in the healthcare arena,
Mm.
around looking at the hospitality culture and how that applies to healthcare. I've worked for many years on interactive live theater and incorporating psychology into this interactive live theater as a training mechanism. So I also am part of that partnership. So I'm, as you can see, I'm not really semi-retired.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like retirement at all. It seems like
It's not, but
full-time
but it's
work
fun
there.
because I'm doing what I love to do, Ernest,
Yeah.
and that's what's great about it.
Now, Connie, you've got such an interesting journey, and I'm really fascinated to hear from you a little bit more about your journey as a leader, because you went straight in from psychology into the world of business and were learning about leadership and developing a lot of concepts and theories. How did that influence your leadership and your management style? Because you were able to identify immediately that you love the leader part, but weren't really engaged in the management administrative part.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I really intentionally tried as a leader to incorporate what I was coaching and telling other people to do, but it's much
Hmm.
harder. I had a boss once who always said, knowing is different than doing, and it is absolutely
Yes.
true.
Yeah.
And I would say I did learn that, the finance, the operations part. I remember I'd meet with the CFO and be like, "Oh, Connie, the numbers are down." And I'd be like, "Why are we talking about last month? Like, there's nothing we can do about last month." They're like, "Well, we
Hmm.
have to understand, or we're going to repeat last month 12 times."
Hmm.
So it just wasn't, part of my motivation was not around, focusing on those sorts of things. But I think, to answer your question directly, like, what did I learn in leadership? So I talked to you about my emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
focus, right? Well, this was a learning for me, is that I overdid it. I overdid the what we call the participative leadership style when I was in
Uh-huh.
that role. Like, I wanted everybody to buy in. I wanted to be very democratic. I was leading actuaries. I was leading, MBA. I was leading not just psychologists. So I was
Yeah.
leading people that had very different backgrounds. And I would say that in the beginning, especially, I was not decisive enough. I
Hmm.
realized you just can't please everyone. In fact, my eye-opening moment was, I remember, back in the day when everything was in person, right? We were in the kitchen before one of my weekly meetings. And I happened to walk in and someone was saying, "Oh, I had to come in, for a big cup of coffee because we're going into one of Connie's meetings and they can last a long time." Like, oh my God, do I really have long meetings? And I realized that I did, because I wanted to just, engage. And also, you could probably tell I'm very extroverted. So
Hmm.
for the introverts, many of the people on the team were introverts. Like, do we really have to talk about, what we did this weekend and all
Yeah.
this? We really don't want to talk about this sort of stuff. We want to get down to business. So I applied it. I think I applied it in good ways in terms of giving people the vision, inspiring. I did a lot of coaching and developing, but I also, learned what not to do.
Yeah. No, I love that example because I think it really highlights how focusing on people is important, but also balancing that with the other responsibilities of leadership. I think that's a really hard thing for leaders to do, is balancing, finding the right balance of what to do with your specific group and sometimes with a specific individual. Is it more of that personal or more of the focusing on the work itself, and that can be really hard. Tell
Yeah.
me about the name Thea Leadership, because I know you do your own work now. How did you develop that name, and how does that work? How does that play into the work that you do?
So I felt that in a lot of my coaching and in my work with teams, that there was a lot of energy and just time being spent
Hmm.
without people thinking about, why are we spending time on this,
Hmm.
or why are we doing all of these things. A lot of busyness without a lot of focus. And so, with the name, I, wanted something that really communicated that in the work that I do, even in some of the work that I do is, quite frankly, it is more, operational HR, just helping to kind of get stuff done within companies. But what I try to bring everything back to, whether it's the strategic work with teams, the coaching, the more operational work, is that, what I try to bring is the why. Why are we doing this? Or why are you doing this? And if you don't know the why,
Mm.
then don't have the meeting or don't do this project or and prioritize, like know your
Yeah.
why, and then that immediately prioritizes things for people and is part of your coaching and everything that you do. If I'm working with teams or individuals, is that vision. So I think if people don't know where they're going, right, they're not going to get there. You have to kind of know what that direction is. So for me, it
Yeah.
was motivation for myself that I wanted to focus and do more of what I love, and it was also how I wanted to work with my clients.
Yeah, I love that you were able to kind of focus in on the thing that you really enjoyed, but are still finding that you're still doing some of that operational stuff, right? Because I think it's the whole package of leadership, right? It's all of these responsibilities that you have to do.
Yeah,
So I know
exactly.
you do a lot of work with teams, with culture, and with leadership. Can you share a little bit about some of the work that you do and how that's really helpful to leaders in terms of making progress into the organization?
Yeah, I mean, probably my favorite thing to do is actually work with teams, and it's it goes back to my roots of loving the social psychology and how
Hmm.
people interact when they're in groups. And one of the formulas, again, go way back to my early Hay Group and David McClellan days, is that whenever you see someone in a particular situation in a team, that
Hmm.
their behavior, right, is a function of both who they are as a person and the situation that they're in.
Yes.
So they're bringing their stuff, right? They're bringing their values and their motives and their strengths and their concerns and their fears. They're bringing all of that. But how they're showing up is also a function of the situation. And the situation is generally that environment that's created by the leader of the team. Now, it's also created by other things. But,
Hmm.
for simplification purposes, what I always say to people who I'm coaching or leaders of teams that I'm working with is that you have a tremendous impact on how people are showing up and how they act together as a team, how they collaborate, how they share, how they don't share.
Yeah.
And what I find is just it's hugely impactful. First of all, to just observe, and so every chance I get to observe a team in action or a leader with a team, oftentimes there's a lot of insights that I can use. And
Hmm.
I just was thinking of one particular example of a leader who was new, brand new to an organization, and inherited the team of people. And I would say a very different leader from the leader who was there prior. Leader who was
Hmm.
there prior was a little bit more focused on the people, creating a very good people friendly culture, and probably a little bit more laid back style.
Mm.
This person who came in was very driven, very wanted to raise standards, but had a great reputation in the field and had some good stuff. Good, good, had good vision. Was really able to get people excited by the vision. But the problem was in the team environment,
Hmm.
people were actually intimidated by this person because the energy and passion was just too much.
Hmm.
But this was someone who was very open to feedback and understanding that the culture that he was walking into was very different than the culture that he came from, and that what he felt oftentimes was giving people structure and responsibility was really making them feel very intimidated and actually fearful. So I worked with him, and I also did a number of sessions with the team. And I find that a lot of times people will say, well, let's do some sessions without the leader there because they don't want, they won't be open.
It's
And I and
open.
I
Yeah.
generally don't like to do that
Hmm.
because it just isn't creating a realistic environment. But the
Mm.
leader has to show up differently,
Yeah.
in order for people to react differently. So basically use that simple formula and said, if you want people to show up as their best, you've got to create a different climate or a different environment. And it really was just shifting some of the ground rules and norms, making it really clear. And the other thing that he did, which I find extremely powerful, is back to the Thea leadership and the vision, and
Yeah.
the light. Like what is our purpose as a team? Like why are we coming together as a team? And everybody brings their own assumptions. And if the leader doesn't clarify, you're here, whatever it is, you're here just to coordinate and make sure that everybody knows what everybody else is doing. But if
Hmm.
one person thinks that no, we're really here to problem solve and to make decisions, and if what one of my peers is doing is is really important to what I'm doing, then I'm going to state that and I'm going to give my opinion. Anyway, you got to set the clarity and the norms.
Yeah.
And it's just, I have found sometimes in just a few sessions with leaders and teams that you see a totally different set of dynamics, within a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit, because that example touches on what you've talked about in terms of emotional intelligence, right? Letting the leader develop their emotional intelligence and understand how external factors impacts their internal motivation, and how that all shows up in their behavior and how that impacts others as well. Talk about how you work with an organization in terms of building emotional intelligence at the individual level and then at the team level, because you mentioned that's different to have emotional intelligence at the team level.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll start with at the individual level, and then you're right, it is very different at the team level, but the concepts are really the same, right? So the approach is that, first of all, you have to build self-awareness, right? You got to build an awareness of, how am I coming across? What is my impact? How do other people see me? How do I show up? And so, that could be a combination of lots of personality assessments out there that give you a sense of this is generally how you show up. I mean, the Hogan is one of the best around, especially how you show up to others, right?
How well do you think leaders do that now? Do you think most leaders are pretty aware about this, or there's some work to be done there?
No. No, I don't. I mean, I think that, listen, I think that good leaders out there do probably are aware of some of those things that are probably easier to give feedback on, right? So, if you're really, someone who, for example, just loses it, or has a lack of self-control, those things, or say, hey, listen, you probably shouldn't show up and be angry or yell at you, like things that are clearly things outside the bounds. I think people get feedback on. I think that oftentimes what people don't get feedback on are those things that are generally very good, but they can be overused strengths. For instance, I'm a very confident, and I'm willing, and I take risks, and I'm smart. That stuff gets rewarded. And then all of a sudden you're in a leadership position, and, you don't want to listen to anybody else because you think you're the smartest person in the room. Right. Some of those things, there are usually blind spots that people often have in those situations, Ernest, I find. And I think it's the same thing with teams. That teams, I remember I observed this one team, and after my observation, I always say, well, what do you think you did well? And they're like, we made lots of decisions. Well, my biggest observation of what they didn't do well was that they didn't make any decisions. This was like I don't know, this was it was like a 3-hour meeting, Twilight Zone, and they didn't make any decision. And they're like, okay, oh, that's of course, that's interesting. Yeah. Give me an example of a decision you made. Well, we made a decision that we would collect more data and discuss this again at the next meeting. That's not a decision. That's deferring a decision. I mean, it was even like I'm not going to say a simple decision, but a really basic decision about, do we sponsor this parade or something? And I was like, you didn't even come up with criteria that you're going to use to go get information on how to make a decision as to whether to be in this parade. So it was all these sorts of things. So self-awareness of teams, you oftentimes don't see what other people see, and teams often don't see when they're in the midst of it either.
That's so interesting. I've worked, what your example reminds me of a team that does exactly that, right? And I've worked with them at the individual level, and so there's some great awareness at the individual level as to how they're behaving. But as a team, that's really interesting, that concept of looking at how we're functioning as a team and really building that emotional intelligence as a team.
Yeah. And I think one of the great values that any facilitator, a good facilitator, really brings in a team is to notice what is happening and to, again, not make assumptions, because I think that's back to, that your intent isn't always impact. Yeah. And you can't make assumptions about, well, this happens all the time, right? People get labeled, you're not a good team player because of how you show up, or you don't share, or you criticize.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you talk to this person, off to the side, and they say, I'm the most committed to this team because I
Mm-hmm.
say what needs to be said. It's the people who sit there and nod their heads who are not the good team players.
Yeah.
So again, back to the work with teams is you have to define, what do we want? What's the behavior that we want on this team? And usually it's not nodding and agreeing, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not criticizing.
Yeah.
So what is that norm? Like, what does that look like? So that's where a lot of the training of how to be an effective team, just like
Yeah.
you would train an individual on how to have self-awareness and self-control,
Yeah.
you could train teams how to do that as well.
Can you talk a little bit about your training as a psychologist and your understanding of human behavior and how that's helped you in this work in terms of helping other people gain awareness?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I know I talked about a negative before when people like to come to my long meetings and how my training. But my training, though, as a psychologist, I think does help me be more aware of,
Mm-hmm.
in the moment. Oh gosh, this is important to pay attention. Like something is happening here, and I need to
Yes.
change. Right.
Uh-huh.
But I do think that if I think about again my training, I think as a leader and as a consultant, it has helped me to work with so
Mm-hmm.
many different types of people. In fact, I had a reputation when I was with Hay Group that if there was a difficult client that nobody could work with, Connie could
You
work
would
with
go.
them. And and I think part of it was because that I wasn't intimidating to people, and I also have a lot of empathy, and I also have
Mm.
a general rule that I try to live by, not always, but I try to live by the fact that if someone is coming across as difficult or rude or inconsiderate or disrespectful, whatever it is,
Yeah.
there's probably something going on with them,
Mm-hmm.
and it's manifesting in this behavior.
Yeah,
And don't
exactly.
take it personal. Now, it's really hard to do, and knowing is different than doing, as I said before. But I think especially knowing that someone is a difficult client, or quite frankly, even difficult employees, oftentimes when I was a practice leader and in other roles, they would say that, can you help this person? We're going to put them, working for you because, you're usually pretty good at, getting to people when other leaders really can't. And so I think that empathy and the training to really understand that people are different and they need different things and they have other stuff going on. And I think that's really helped me. And certainly in a lot of my coaching,
Mm-hmm.
it's really evolved to, you know, not necessarily life coaching,
Mm-hmm.
but full person coaching, because that's what people bring and that's what impact people's ability
Yeah.
to get things done.
Yeah, I love that. I think you've hit on the mark there in terms of your training to be able to notice things, right? I think that's something that I find a lot of people don't notice, even when body language changes or just when the tenor of the room changes and people just barge on and not notice. I've lost the crowd, I've lost the room, and so I need to stop and figure out what's going on. So that training as a psychologist has really helped me to be able to identify when things shift in the moment.
Yeah. Noticing it, Ernest, and I think then just knowing how to bring it up without it sounding judgmental or
Hmm.
critical,
Yeah.
right? And so I had a situation, a very difficult client that was actually came from a competitor and was now working for a client and was doing everything possible to try to, make me and the team look bad.
Mm-hmm.
It was in a room of 20 some people. And I just remember that I was getting to the point where I felt like I was really going to just lose it, whatever that looked like. I wasn't sure. Cry or yell or be really rude and nasty right back. So what I did was I was able to say in the moment that I think we need to take a pause.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest that we take a break, and maybe a few of us who are in this very heated, I can't remember the word I used, heated
Yeah.
discussion. I said, let's take it offline, because you
Mm-hmm.
could just see everybody, even though I was feeling a certain way, everybody else in the room was probably feeling even worse because it's just very weird dynamic. And so
Yeah.
we just took it offline. And I'm not saying, again, I wish I was always that, able to do those things in the moment. But
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you, this was over 20 years ago. And when I still am in contact with a number of my colleagues who are in that room, still bring it up. It's like, we will never forget that moment because it was so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And everyone was just looking at my face saying, she's going to lose it.
Yeah.
We've never seen her lose it. What's she going to do? So all eyes were on me and I knew it. So anyway, so it's noticing it. Of course, in that case, I couldn't help but notice, and then knowing what to do about it. And in a lot of my coaching, that's what I try to help people to do, and recognize that you may not always do the right thing, but when you notice that you didn't do the right thing, then just change it. It's okay. Like if it's the wrong thing, just do something different and try something else.
It starts with recognition, recognizing the situation, and then knowing, hey, I need to do something different, and then engaging that different. Connie, this has been so much fun. I really enjoyed talking to you. We could go on, and we're just gonna have to have you come back because there's a lot more to talk about. But how do people get a hold of you? People want to continue the conversation or get in touch with you to hire your services. How do people get a hold of you?
So I can give my email is Connie.Schroyer, SCHROYER, and it's at TheaLeadership.com. So Thea's THEIA, TheaLeadership.com.
Awesome. Thank you. And then I always want to take advantage of the great guests that we have, the experts such as yourself, and ask, what's a tip that you can give to businesses or organizations or leaders, given this time, the environment that we're in right now?
Yeah. So the one tip I would give is to stop trying to do everything, stop multitasking, and focus. Focus and reflect. Mm-hmm. Right? Just whatever is your style. For me, I have a journal, and I try to say what are the most important things that I need to get done this month, week, this day. It varies depending upon how I'm feeling. And then I reflect. So focus and reflect, right? Go back and reflect. Have I spent my time and my energy doing the things that I want to focus on? And it's amazing. Even when you're intentional about it, I think, for me personally, sometimes I find, no, I'm not focusing my time and energy on the right things, but I reflect on it and I'm very specific about what to change. So that would be my best advice. Focus, reflect. I actually read this book once. I think it was called The One Thing. And I hope I'm not offending any listeners, but it wasn't exactly the right advice for me at the time. And I wouldn't say there's only one thing that you should focus on, but focus on the few things that are really going to bring about the biggest impact, the biggest difference, and get you where you want to go.
I really love that advice because it really talks about making sure that the time that you are engaging in activities is time well spent, in terms of time that you want to get out of it, the things that you're actually aiming to get out of it. Because a lot of us are perpetually busy. I mean, life can just be so busy. And even at work, you spend your time doing so many things. But are the things that you're doing helping you get to the goal that you have in mind? Are they helping you achieve that specific objective that you've set out for yourself? So really focusing, taking the time to reflect. I like the idea of a time journal, making sure that you're spending your time wisely, because that's there in black and white. You can see I spent X amount of time doing this. Did that really get me to what I wanted to, or is there something that I need to do differently? So I really appreciate that advice.
Yeah, it's the time. And also, I don't know if you're a fan of Robin Sharma, but he talks a lot about, are you spending your time in the right ways and your time with the right people and in the right places that bring you joy. He talks about that. And so I try to, again, my whole life, I try to think about now, am I spending my time with the people in the places and with the things that bring me joy? That's my kind of light in the sky that I
love that. I think that's really sage advice. Thank you, Connie.
Welcome.
Again, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. It's been so much fun. We'll have to have you come back.
I would love to, Ernest. Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Excellent. And to our audience, I hope you will join us next time.